Stop worrying, the true Stoic wisdom. Inner Steel, YouTube script. Inner Steel, YouTube script. Cold open. You're lying awake at 3 in the morning. Not because anything has happened. Not because there's a real emergency. But because your mind has decided, tonight is the night. It rehearses every single thing that could go wrong. The bill. The relationship. The job. The future. The thing you said 2 years ago that you still haven't forgiven yourself for. And here's what nobody tells you, that's not weakness. That's not a character flaw. That is a mind that has never been trained. Because worry doesn't live in the world. It lives in your head. And today, we're going to build something in you that makes the world's noise irrelevant. Stay with me. Point 1. The Stoics didn't suppress worry, they understood it. There's a story about Marcus Aurelius that most people never hear. He was emperor of Rome. The most powerful man alive. And yet, every single morning, before the sun rose over the Palatine Hill, before the advisors came, before the dispatches arrived from the frontier, he sat alone and wrote. Not strategy. Not decrees. He wrote to himself. He wrote about fear. He wrote about the things that disturbed him. He wrote honestly, brutally honestly, about how difficult it was to hold himself together while an empire pulled at him from every direction. One of his most famous lines reads, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." But here's what that line is hiding. He didn't write it because it was easy. He wrote it because every morning, he had to remind himself. Most people believe the Stoics were emotionless. Cold. Unfeeling. They picture a man of marble sitting untouched while the world burns around him. That is not Stoicism. That is a myth. The Stoics were deeply feeling people. Marcus grieved his children. Seneca wrote about anxiety with a vulnerability that would make modern therapists nod. Epictetus, a former slave, wrote about the ache of powerlessness with a rawness born from lived experience. What separated them was not the absence of worry. It was what they did with it. They understood something that modern psychology has only recently confirmed, that worry is, at its core, a mislabeled attempt at control. Your mind worries because it believes that if it thinks hard enough, long enough, in enough detail about the bad thing, somehow, it will prevent it. It won't. And the Stoics knew this. Worry is not preparation. Worry is the illusion of preparation. The mind pacing the same corridor over and over, convincing itself that movement is progress. Marcus Aurelius didn't stop worrying by becoming numb. He stopped worrying by becoming precise. He trained himself to ask one question every time his mind drifted into panic: is this in my control? If yes, act. If no, release. That's not a slogan. That's a practice. It requires daily effort, daily honesty, and a willingness to let go of the thing you are gripping most tightly. And it starts with understanding that your worry is not a signal of danger. It is a signal that you have not yet made peace with uncertainty. Point 2. The dichotomy of control is not philosophy, it's surgery. Let me tell you about a man named James Stockdale. In 1965, Stockdale's plane was shot down over North Vietnam. He was captured, tortured, and held in the Hanoi Hilton for 7.5 years. No rights. No communication. No timeline for release. Before he was deployed, Stockdale had been reading Epictetus, a Stoic philosopher who had himself been a slave, owned, controlled, beaten, and who had still managed to write the most liberating philosophy the ancient world ever produced. Epictetus wrote, "Men are disturbed not by things, but by their opinions about things." In that prison, Stockdale held on to this idea like it was oxygen. He couldn't control the torture. He couldn't control the isolation. He couldn't control whether he would ever see his family again. What he could control was his interpretation of events. His posture. His refusal to be broken inwardly even when he was broken outwardly. He later said that Epictetus saved his life. Now, I want you to sit with that for a moment. Not because your situation is like Stockdale's, but because if Stoic philosophy could preserve a man's identity through 7.5 years of torture, what could it do with your Tuesday? The dichotomy of control is the first surgical cut Stoicism makes on a worried mind. It divides your experience into two categories. Things in your control, your thoughts, your choices, your effort, your response. Things not in your control, other people, outcomes, timing, weather, opinion, luck. Most of us spend 90% of our mental energy on the second category and wonder why we're exhausted. You worry about whether they like you. Not in your control. You worry about whether the deal will close. Not in your control. You worry about what people are saying behind your back. Not in your control. Here is what is in your control: how thoroughly you prepared. Whether you showed up with integrity. How you respond if it falls apart. Epictetus didn't tell Stockdale to stop feeling pain. He told him to stop confusing pain with defeat. The next time your mind spirals, do this. Pause. Take one breath. Then ask, what part of this is actually mine to manage? Start there. Only there. Everything else, surrender. Not because you don't care, but because caring about things outside your control is not caring. It's suffering voluntarily. Point 3. Seneca's secret. Stop borrowing trouble from the future. Seneca wrote a letter, letter 5, to his friend Lucilius, that should be required reading for every human being alive. He wrote, "There are more things likely to frighten us than there are to crush us. We suffer more in imagination than in reality." He was writing this from personal experience. Seneca lived through exile. He lived through the reign of Caligula, an emperor who murdered people for sport. He was forced to be an advisor to Nero, a man who would eventually order his death. Seneca had real, actual, legitimate reasons to be afraid. And yet his consistent counsel, to Lucilius and to himself, was this: stop rehearsing disasters that haven't happened. He described a practice he called negative visualization, not dwelling on the worst case to spiral into panic, but briefly, clearly, confronting the worst case in order to defuse it. Here is how it works. Think of the thing that worries you most right now. Go ahead. Let it surface. Now ask, what is the actual worst that could happen? Let yourself see it clearly. Don't flinch. Don't soften it. What is the real bottom? Now ask, could I survive that? In most cases, not all, but most, the honest answer is yes. You would be hurt, disrupted, changed. But you would survive. And then ask the next question Seneca always returned to: how likely is this worst case, really? Because here's what the worried mind does. It gives every bad outcome a probability of 100%. It treats every possible loss as a guaranteed loss. And it makes you carry grief for things that haven't happened and may never happen. Seneca called this borrowing trouble. And he said it was among the most foolish things a rational man could do. You are not preparing for the future when you worry. You are spending the present in mourning for a loss that exists nowhere but in your imagination. The Stoic alternative is not blind optimism. It is clear sight. See the risk honestly. Do what you can. Then return to now. Right now, this moment, what is actually wrong? Usually, nothing. And that nothing is the life you're missing while you worry about later. Point 4. The man who lost everything and stopped worrying. Viktor Frankl was an Austrian psychiatrist. In 1942, he was arrested by the Nazis and sent to the concentration camps, Auschwitz among them. His wife, his parents, his brother, all killed. He lost everything that a person can lose. In those camps, Frankl made an observation that would become the foundation of one of the most powerful psychological frameworks in history. He noticed that some men, not all, but some, were not destroyed by the camps. Not because they suffered less, but because they had found something the camps could not take. He wrote, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. He called this the last freedom. And it is the same freedom Epictetus wrote about 2,000 years earlier from his own form of imprisonment. This is what Stoicism has always known, and what worry steals from you every single day. Worry is the surrendering of that last freedom. It is handing your inner state over to outcomes, to other people, to the future, before any of those things have even arrived. Frankl survived the camps. He went on to write Man's Search for Meaning, one of the most read books of the 20th century. He built a life of extraordinary meaning from the rubble of total loss. Not because the camps were not horrific. They were. But because he refused to let his mind be a prisoner even when his body was. Now hear this clearly: your worry is not keeping you safe. It is not solving your problems. It is consuming the interior freedom that is the one thing no circumstance can take from you. Every hour you spend in anxious rehearsal is an hour you gave away. Not to a person. Not to a problem. To nothing. Choose differently. Not once. Every single time. Point 5. The present moment is the only real place. Marcus Aurelius wrote something that cuts through every layer of modern noise in a single sentence. He wrote, "Confine yourself to the present. Not to the thing that happened last year. Not to the conversation you're dreading next week. Not to the version of the future where everything goes wrong. Confine yourself to now." There's a story about a young Roman general who came to Marcus with a crushing anxiety. The frontier was unstable. The barbarian tribes were unpredictable. The general couldn't sleep. He lay awake cataloging every possible scenario: invasion from the north, betrayal from within, supply routes being cut, disease in the camps. Marcus listened. Then he asked one question. "Is any of that happening right now?" The general said no. Marcus nodded. "Then deal with what is in front of you today. Tomorrow will have its own demands. The mind that scatters itself across all of time is useful in none of it." This is not a dismissal of planning. The Stoics were extremely practical people. They planned. They prepared. They wargamed scenarios. But then they returned to now. There is a difference between strategic preparation and anxious rumination. One is purposeful and time-limited. The other is compulsive and endless. Modern neuroscience has a name for what happens when you drag the past and future into every present moment. It's called the default mode network. And research consistently shows that mind-wandering, particularly toward negative futures, is the single greatest predictor of unhappiness. Not poverty. Not pain. Not circumstance. Mind-wandering. The Stoics didn't have fMRI machines. But they knew. Marcus practiced returning to the present moment the way an athlete practices a movement, repeatedly, deliberately, without self-judgment when he drifted. You will drift. That is not failure. Noticing that you have drifted and returning, that is the practice. Right now. Not later. Not tomorrow. Right now, what needs your full attention? Give it that. Give all of yourself to the only moment that is actually real. Point 6. Worry is a habit. Habits can be replaced. Before we go further, if this is landing for you, if you can feel it working something open inside you, subscribe to Inner Steel. Every week we go deeper into the philosophy and practice of building a mind that doesn't break. Hit that button now and we'll keep building together. Now, let me tell you about Cato the Younger. Cato was one of the most admired Stoics in Roman history, not because he wrote philosophy, but because he lived it with an almost unreasonable commitment. He walked barefoot through Rome's streets, a senator, to remind himself that comfort was not required for dignity. He fasted when food was abundant. He slept on hard surfaces by choice. He trained his mind and body with a discipline that his contemporaries found almost alien. Why? Because he understood something that the worried mind never confronts: anxiety is a habit. And all habits live in the body as much as they live in the mind. Worry has a physical signature. You know it. The tight chest. The shortened breath. The jaw you clench without noticing. The shoulders riding up toward your ears. The stomach that won't settle. This is your nervous system running a pattern. Not because of what is happening, but because of what it has been trained to do. Cato trained his nervous system out of luxury dependence the same way you must train yours out of worry dependence. Deliberately. Systematically. With repetition. Here is what this looks like practically. When you notice worry beginning, and the key is early, catching it before it builds, interrupt the physical pattern first. Slow your breath. Deliberately relax your jaw. Drop your shoulders. Unclench your hands. This is not self-deception. This is neuroscience. You cannot sustain a panic response in a relaxed body. The two states are physiologically incompatible. Then, ask the Stoic questions. Is this in my control? What is the worst realistic outcome? Am I in danger right now? You are building a new habit. Not the absence of worry, but a trained, practiced response to it. One that interrupts the spiral before it takes you over. Cato did this every day. Not because life stopped being difficult, but because he refused to be ruled by his own nervous system. You have the same capacity. It simply requires the same commitment. Point 7. What you fear, you strengthen. Zeno of Citium founded Stoicism around 300 BC. He started teaching in a covered walkway in Athens, a stoa, which is where the school got its name. Before he was a philosopher, he was a merchant. His ship sank. He lost everything. Standing on the shore of Athens with nothing, he walked into a bookshop, picked up a book about Socrates, and became so absorbed that he asked the bookseller where he could find men like that. The bookseller pointed to a man walking past. It was Crates, a philosopher. Zeno followed him. And from a shipwreck and a chance conversation in a bookshop, one of the most powerful philosophies in human history was born. But here is the piece of Zeno's story that matters most for this point. He didn't try to pretend the shipwreck hadn't happened. He didn't avoid the grief. He walked directly into a new life through it. Because what Stoicism teaches, and what modern psychology now confirms, is that avoidance strengthens fear, not weakens it. Every time you refuse to look at the thing you're afraid of, you teach your brain that it is too dangerous to examine. You reinforce its power. You make it larger. This is why worry loops. You avoid the real fear by circling it endlessly with smaller fears. And the avoidance tells your nervous system, that thing in the center is so terrifying we can't even look at it directly. So look at it. Name the actual fear. Not, I'm worried about money. Dig deeper. What specifically? I'm afraid I won't be able to provide for my family. Go deeper. I'm afraid that means I am a failure. Go deeper. I'm afraid that if I fail, I am unlovable. There it is. That core belief, that your worth is conditional, that failure makes you less, that love has to be earned, that is what generates most human worry at its root. Stoicism disagrees with that belief entirely. Your worth is not located in outcomes. It never was. But you can only begin to challenge that belief when you are willing to look at it directly. Walk toward the thing, like Zeno walked toward a new life through the wreckage of the old one. What you face loses power. What you avoid grows. Point 8. The practice of a more fati. Love what is. There is a phrase in Stoic philosophy that sounds, on first hearing, almost absurd. Amor fati. Love your fate. Not accept your fate. Not tolerate your fate. Love it. The Stoics, particularly Marcus, return to this idea constantly. Because it is the most radical reframe available to a worried mind. Worry is, at its core, a refusal. A refusal to accept what is uncertain, what is uncomfortable, what is outside your control. It is the mind saying, I will not be okay with this. I need it to be different. Amor fati says something different. It says, this is the material I have been given. and I will work with it. All of it. Even the hard parts. Especially the hard parts. Let me give you a story. There was a Japanese swordsmith in the Edo period named Masamune. He was considered among the finest craftsmen who ever lived. A student once asked him, "Master, what is the secret of a perfect blade?" Masamune paused. Then he said, "There is no perfect ore. There is only what you do with the ore in front of you." The worried mind spends its energy wishing for different or better circumstances, a different past, a more certain future. And in doing so, it neglects the ore it actually has, which is the only thing available to work with. Amor fati is not passive. It is not resignation. It is the most active stance available to a human being, because it directs all your energy toward what is rather than what isn't. When Marcus faced the death of his children, and he faced it multiple times, he did not tell himself not to grieve. He grieved. But he returned again and again to the understanding that the nature of human life includes loss, and that fighting that reality costs more than accepting it. This is the highest form of mental freedom. Not freedom from difficulty. Freedom within it. The next time something goes wrong, something you did not choose and cannot change, try this. Instead of asking why is this happening to me, ask what is this asking of me. One question closes. The other opens. Everything that has ever happened to you was the ore you were given. The question is never whether you deserved better ore. The question is always, what will you make of what you have? Point 9. The meditation Marcus never skipped. Every morning without exception, even on military campaign, even in his worst moments of grief and political crisis, Marcus Aurelius wrote. This is not a metaphor. His journal exists. We call it Meditations. It was never meant to be published. It was written for himself, to himself, a man holding himself accountable to his own philosophy in real time. What he wrote was simple. He named the difficulties likely to come that day. He reminded himself of the principles he intended to live by. And he prepared his mind before the world had a chance to take it from him. This is the Stoic morning practice. And it is the single most powerful weapon against worry that I know. Here is why it works. Worry thrives in the unexamined mind. It lives in the gaps between awareness and action. It feeds on vagueness, on the shapeless dread that hasn't been named and therefore can't be addressed. The morning writing practice makes the vague specific. It forces you to look at what you're actually afraid of rather than carrying the fear as a general fog. Marcus would write, "Today I may meet people who are unkind. Today I may face difficulty. Today things may not go as I intend." And by naming these possibilities at the start of the day, he did something remarkable. He removed their power to surprise him. He had already met them on the page. The day held no ambushes. This is not pessimism. This is preparation of a different kind. Not logistical preparation, emotional and philosophical preparation. If you take nothing else from this video, take this. Tomorrow morning, before your phone, before your coffee, before the noise begins, write. 5 minutes. What are you worried about? Name it precisely. What is in your control within that situation? What can you let go of? Do this for 30 days and tell me your mind is the same. It won't be. Point 10. Stop waiting for the worry to end. Here is the hardest truth in Stoic philosophy. And I want you to hear it clearly, because it is the truth that most people avoid and it is the one that will change everything. The worry will not end. Not completely. Not permanently. This is not pessimism. This is honesty. And the Stoics were always honest. The human mind has a negativity bias baked in by evolution. It is designed to scan for threat. It kept your ancestors alive. It will not simply switch off because you have read some philosophy. But, and this is the turn, you do not need it to end. You need to stop letting it rule. There is a story about Epictetus and one of his students who came to him frustrated. He said, "Master, I have been practicing for months. I still feel fear. I still feel anxiety. I thought Stoicism was supposed to fix this. Epictetus smiled. He said, You misunderstand the goal. The goal is not to feel nothing. The goal is that the feeling no longer carries you. A wave does not stop being a wave because you have learned to surf. But you stop being drowned by it. This is maturity of practice. And it requires you to give up the fantasy that one day you will arrive at a permanent state of calm, and instead commit to the ongoing, daily, unglamorous work of returning. Returning to center. Returning to the present. Returning to what is in your control. Not once. 1,000 times. Marcus returned 1,000 times. Epictetus returned 1,000 times. Seneca returned 1,000 times, and still wrote letters about how difficult it was. The practice is not graduation. The practice is the point. And every time you return, every single time you catch the spiral and redirect it, you strengthen the muscle. Not all at once. Over months. Over years. This is the long game. The game of a man who has decided that his inner life belongs to him. Point 11. The identity shift that changes everything. There is a final move that Stoicism asks of you. And it is not a technique. It is a decision. It is the decision about who you are. Let me tell you about a man named Frederick Douglass. Douglass was born into slavery in Maryland. He was not permitted to read. Not permitted to think freely. Not permitted to own his own body. But at a certain age, in secret, at risk to his life, he learned to read. And something happened when the words of great thinkers entered his mind. He later wrote, Once you learn to read, you will be forever free. He didn't mean legally free. He was still enslaved. He meant that the interior, the mind, had been liberated. And nothing that was done to his body could change what had happened inside him. He escaped. He became one of the most powerful orators in American history. He advised Abraham Lincoln. He wrote memoirs that shook the conscience of a nation. But the turning point, the real one, was not his escape. It was the moment he decided, I am not what they have made of me. This is the Stoic identity shift. Most people who worry have, at some level, accepted an identity built on worry. It is how they relate to the world. It is their relationship to the future. It is, in a distorted way, how they feel connected to the things they love, by being afraid of losing them. Stoicism invites you to make a different decision. Not, I am a person who is trying to worry less. But I am a person who takes full responsibility for their inner state. A person who has chosen, deliberately, not to be governed by what is outside them. A person who returns to center, not because it is easy, but because it is who they are. That identity becomes a force of gravity. It pulls your behavior toward it automatically. Not perfectly, but consistently. You are not waiting to feel calm before you act like a calm person. You act like the person you have decided to be, and the feeling follows. Not always immediately, but it follows. Douglass did not wait to feel free before acting free. He acted free, and that action, repeated, committed, courageous, became his reality. Who have you decided to be? Because that decision, made clearly, held firmly, returned to daily, is the truest practice of Stoic philosophy. Not a state to achieve. A person to become. Closing. You came here worried. Maybe you still feel some of it. But I want you to notice something. In the time you have been here, your mind has been somewhere other than the spiral. And that is not nothing. That is the beginning. Marcus Aurelius did not become Marcus Aurelius in a day. Epictetus did not transcend his chains in a single moment of insight. Frankl did not survive the camps because he had solved human suffering. He survived because every day, in impossible conditions, he returned to the one thing no one could take. His choice. That choice is yours. Today. In whatever is in front of you right now. Stop worrying about the outcome. Control your response. Face the fear directly. Return to the present. Love what is. Do the work. Return when you drift. That is the practice. That is the path. And that path does not end, it deepens. Every week on this channel, Inner Steel goes deeper into the philosophy and the practice of becoming a man whose foundation does not shake. If you are not subscribed, subscribe now. Because this work, this real, daily, unglamorous, transformative work, this is what we do here. The world will always have noise. The question is whether it will always have you. Go be steel.